Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
When it comes to the more consequential treatment plans in your practice, is prepayment among the payment options you offer to your patients? In other words, in addition to patient financing or a deposit to reserve my time on your schedule, do I also have the option to pay now in full? And do I get any kind of incentive for doing this? The idea of having patients prepay for their treatment plans has been around for some time. You saw it a lot more prior to the advent of patient financing, but it's still out there and it's still used. But it does have its pros and cons. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this week's episode. In addition to the pros and cons, I'm also going to discuss 4 things you should keep in mind in order to make prepayments work in your practice. My name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host. And I'll start off by saying that I am a fan of prepaying. I think the pros far outweigh the cons, and it can make your life a lot easier. That said, it's something that you have to look at for your practice individually and see how it might fit into your business model. So to end on a happy note, I figured I'd start with the cons first, and then I'll get into the pros. So here goes. So what are the cons? Number one is you lose a little bit of money if you're offering some type of incentive. If you have a 5% prepayment discount, some people do more than 5%. They have a bit of a sliding scale. They might have, for under X amount of dollars is 5%, and then every additional 1,000 or 2,000, it's 6%, 7%. They go up by 1%. So you're going to lose something if you're offering some type of an incentive to pay now. Now that being said, that what you're losing is usually nothing compared to what you'd lose with patient financing. Not that I'm not down on patient financing at all. I think it's opened up vistas that maybe patients didn't have 20 years ago and offers them the ability to access treatment that they wouldn't have been able to. So I think it's great. That being said, the merchant fee on a lot of patient financing plans can be pretty prohibitive, especially for the longer term plans. So, it's one of these deals where if you're going to do prepayment, you're still not going to be eating as much as you would with patient financing. So that wouldn't necessarily exclude it for me as an option, but it is something to consider. You will lose some money. The other thing you have to think with is if it's a larger treatment plan, and let's say you were doing a payment plan internally with the patient, how much would you have to spend chasing that money? What if they miss a patient? How many phone calls will it generate? And, the inflation clock is always ticking, so that money becomes worth less and less as time goes on. You've probably seen graphs like this, like the value of $1 over time that you don't collect it, especially as the balance gets old. So, if you take those 2 factors into consideration, the prepayment discount is usually not all that bad. Con number 2 with prepayments is the potential for a refund if you don't deliver quickly, right? And I say quickly because that's an important part of making it work, especially if you're going to tell me or offer me the ability to pay today to take advantage of saving a couple dollars to pay for my whole treatment plan. And I'm not going to end up on your schedule for, 3 weeks. That gives me a lot of time to think about it. That also gives a lot of time for life to step in and to happen. Things can go wrong. I may need that money. I may regret having spent that money. Someone I talk to may try to talk me out of it and tell me to do something else. So if you don't deliver quickly, that's a potential refund. That's a potential problem. And it's something that you normally don't think with. If you're collecting money from a patient for services you have not delivered yet, from a business perspective, that is actually a liability. I mean, think about this. If you're on and I'm not going to get into the different types of accounting you might be under, but technically you've taken in money you haven't delivered yet. That's services you owe or monies you owe in lieu of not delivering such services. So it's actually a liability on your balance sheet. So until you deliver it, it's a liability. There might be a lot of excitement. Hey, we just collected $40,000 for an all-on-X case, but until you deliver that all-on-X case, that's a liability. You owe that money back if you don't deliver. And you have to think with this, especially if you're ever doing AR reviews, accounts receivable reviews, maybe once a week, once a month, probably more like once a month. When you pull your AR, you're going to want to look at a couple of things. You're going to want to make sure if you're doing prepayments that you exclude credit balances to see what patients actually owe you. You should actually look at credit balances as well. But in other words, let's kind of walk through this. If I'm pulling my AR and I'm doing prepayments in the practice, I'm going to look at it from a couple different perspectives. Number one, I'm going to pull just a gross accounts receivable. What is it, right? Okay, so I look at my aging report. Then I'm going to pull AR excluding credit balances, and then I'm going to pull an AR with just credit balances because I'm going to look, what if I have a 60 or a 90-day credit balance that's been sitting on account? That means that's 90 days have gone by where I've taken in money from a patient and I have not delivered. That is a liability. That is a problem. We need to get on that. It should not really even go past a couple days or a week max. I mean, I understand for longer term treatment plans it might, but in any event, I'm going to want to make sure that those credit balances don't stay on account for very long. And then I'm going to want to look at it without credit balances so I can actually see who actually owes me money. Okay. Because, if I look at it with the credit balances, I'll give you an example. Let's say I have $60,000 of prepayments I've taken in and I have $100,000 that I haven't delivered yet and $100,000 of patient balances validly owed to the practice. So I have 100 owed to me, 60 in credit balances. If I just pull an AR and I look at that last number on the last page, it's going to tell me I have an accounts receivable of $40,000. $100,000 that I'm owed and $60,000 in credit balances. It gets subtracted from what you're owed. So I'm going to want to pull those separately so I can see my credit balances as well as what do patients actually validly own the practice or owe the practice rather, because the longer you let that stuff sit, the worse that it gets. Okay. The other thing to consider with this, which this is point number 3, but I'll sort of append it to point number 2. If you're doing a lot of larger cases, and a patient prepays for these cases, especially if it's not something you're going to deliver right away. Maybe you'll start it. Maybe it's a big implant case and you're placing the implants pretty quick, but then you got to wait before you actually finish the case. You're going to want to possibly escrow some of that money. And escrow is more a legal term. I don't want to use that. And let me be clear. I am not an accountant. I'm not a tax attorney. And I definitely recommend that you talk to your accountant or tax attorney about these things. I am not giving you that kind of advice. It's just something I'm making you aware of that you should seek that advice. But if I'm taking in $40,000 and I'm not going to finish delivering this case for 2 months or 3 months or however long it might take me, I'm going to probably only spend the money as I deliver it. So let's say my initial I'm placing some implants and doing some restorations. Let's say that appointment was $15,000. Fine. Then I'm going to take that 15 because I finished that, right? And then I'm going to take the rest when I do the rest, because you end up with a situation, especially if, let's say, let's say you're on average at collecting, 100, 150,000 a month and you just took in $40,000. That's a quarter to almost half of what you collect in a given month. If you just spend that money right away and then the patient turns around a week or two later and says they want it back, that can be catastrophic for your business. So, whereas if you were collecting 600 or 700,000, you took in 40,000 and spent it, which I still wouldn't advise, you could absorb that hit much, much easier. But it's something that you have to account for. It's not the usual dental business model. The usual dental business model was do the work, get paid. So this is a little bit of a different model, and it's something you're going to have to keep the proper administration for so that you don't build up humongous credit balances that are getting unused, as well as that you're not spending money that you have not earned yet, especially if they're larger cases and your revenue, and they're a large portion or a large percentage of your revenue. Remember, this is a liability. The last issue is sort of a funny one. It's the insurance issue, right? This is something I've heard about off and on from different people, and then I've heard other people poo-pooing it. I'm not taking a particular position on this. I've sought my own advice on it, and I'll tell you what I heard, but I'm going to ask you not to use that as advice. I'm not offering it. Please do not use it. I'm not offering legal advice. I'm not a lawyer. But, the issue is this. If, let's say you're selling a crown for $1,300 and the insurance is going to cover half of it, $650, and the copayment is $650, and you're giving a patient a 5% discount on their copayment if they prepay. So 5% of $650 is $32.50. So their copayment goes from $650 to $617.50. So the issue was when you're filing insurance, normally you're putting your full fee on there, $1,300, right? Well, truthfully, all I'm going to get paid is $650 from the insurance company and $617.50 for the patient. So I'm getting $1,267.50, right? That's the argument I've heard about this. Am I putting the right amount on the insurance form? And to be clear, I'm not taking a position on this. This is something that you have to check out for yourself. I'm not offering you any type of actionable advice. This is something you have to find out for yourself. I'm not a lawyer. I did speak to one at the time when I first heard this, and it was funny. And again, I'm not trying to build up any legitimacy from our argument by saying this, but it was an attorney who was the head of a healthcare division in the second largest law firm on the planet, right? So again, this is years ago. So again, you got to seek your own advice. But I spoke to him. And he was an $800 an hour attorney. And the point he brought up was, is every single patient prepaying? And I said, well, no, that's never going to be the case. Some people do patient financing. Some people pay later. Some people pay as they go, et cetera. He didn't see it as a big deal in that point because it wasn't sort of a global policy in the practice, because it's not like you're charging less to the insurance or charging or saying you're charging a certain amount to the insurance company when you're in fact charging yet less universally. But in any event, that's an argument I've heard about it. I've heard good and bad. It's something that you might want to check out if it's something that you're going to institute in your practice, just to make sure that you're walking the right line. That being said, if you take a look, if I come into your practice and let's say you accept PPOs, and let's say I'm a cash patient, I don't have any insurance. Well, your full fee is $1,300 and your PPO's fee is $880. I mean, that's kind of funny in and of itself. So there's a lot of different weird, because this was, again, when I sought this advice, this was when PPO infiltration was maybe 50% of the profession as opposed to 80. This is something you might want to check out for yourself before you institute, but, and make sure your lawyer has you on the right path if you're going to institute this thing. So those are the cons of prepayment. It's going to cost you a couple dollars, usually not as much as patient financing. There is the potential for refund if you don't deliver, and it creates the need for a whole other administrative system because you're going to be building credit balances, especially with larger cases. And then there's the potential insurance issues. Well, what are the pros of prepayments? Well, there's quite a few. First one is it more or less nukes your cancellations from orbit as far as your larger cancellations for larger cases. Generally, if somebody pays, they're going to show up. Assuming they haven't had any type of a consideration where they've changed their mind about the treatment plan or whatever, they're going to show up. Usually when a prepayment patient cancels, it's usually because, they're ill, they had to leave town for a family emergency. It's not like they just don't want to do it because they've already paid for it. So patients are a lot less likely to wobble at that point because they've already made the commitment. The second pro is it tells you the patient is serious about doing it. Lots of people say lots of things. So if you tell me, this is the treatment plan I need, I might say, oh, doctor, I'm so excited about doing this. I'm going to bring you in a check next week, or I'm very excited about starting it. Until I make any type of a commitment, you really don't know. Maybe I've been a patient of yours for 20 years, in which case you do know, okay? Because I've always done it this way. But if that isn't the case, until I've actually done something in the real physical universe to show you I'm serious about this, I've done patient financing, I've put a deposit down, or I've prepaid, you really don't know for a fact that I'm serious about it. So this sort of takes that ability for someone to pull the wool over your eyes and throws it out the door, because I've paid in full. I'm obviously serious about doing this. Okay. It also, the next pro is it avoids the labor associated with financial chase up. There is no labor associated with it. I've already been paid, and that labor is usually going to exceed the 5% that you gave me as an incentive to pay, as I was talking about earlier. The other thing that I like about prepayment is it gives you a prediction on your cash flow and what your future weeks look like. So if I look at my schedule and I know that, this person has paid, this person's paid, this person's paid, I know my schedule is going to be relatively solid at that point. I also have an idea that if I close this case, which again, I'm hoping to deliver this case soon, okay, I have an idea of what my cash flow is going to look like, gives me some prediction on my collections, and gives me a little bit more control. I'm not waiting to get paid. All right. The other thing I like about it, one of the pros, is when the patient comes in to do their treatment, it's not like we have to talk to them at the end and work out how they're going to pay. Okay. Or do anything associated with collections, especially if it's, they're all numbed up. Maybe they had a bunch of extractions. The last thing we want to do is have a discussion. The last thing they want to do is have a financial discussion. It's already taken care of. Okay. They're going to be done. They finish. It's done. We see them, we schedule their next appointment, and they're on their way. So in my view, it definitely adds a bit of prediction to the practice. It gives you a little bit more control over your collections, as well as it keeps your schedule a heck of a lot more solid. Now, a couple of comments on if you're going to do prepayments. And again, you have to get your own understanding of how it might work for your practice. There are some things that I've seen that work and that don't. Let's start with the first one. First one is prepayment doesn't mean pay before the appointment. Prepayment means pay now. So you've just presented a $10,000 case, and I'm going to save $500, 5% if I prepay. That means I pay today. Now, what if I don't have the credit card that I want to use on me? Well, fine. I'm going to go home and I'm going to bring it in tomorrow, or I'm going to call your treatment coordinator with it later tonight to get this all taken care of. Okay. Prepayment means pay now. Like I've made the commitment now. I can go on the schedule. We know I'm done. We know I'm for real. Not the appointment is next Wednesday and I'm going to pay on Tuesday, because you really don't know anything at that point until Tuesday. And this is really a policy point in the practice, because this could easily get abused, where you could say, well, if you prepay, meaning you pay before we actually do the treatment, you save 5%. Okay, well, when am I going to get the treatment done? Next Wednesday. Okay, good. I'll bring it in on Wednesday morning or Tuesday. It doesn't work. Prepayment means you pay today. So if you pay today, you save this much. Okay. Now, if there's a reason they can't, I can pay tomorrow morning because I have to go get my card. Fine. Within reason, right? Second thing is, I've been asked, should I let patients or prepay on a credit card? I'm totally fine with that. Sure. If I'm giving them 5% and my credit card fee is 3%, I'm eating an additional 3% or 8% altogether. So what? That's usually going to be less than patient financing. And for many people, that's the only means by which they can prepay. Of course, I'd prefer, a bank wire or a bank transfer or a check, but you can't always get what you want. So I'll take a credit card as a prepayment. I will not take patient financing for a prepayment, because in the patient's mind, patient financing is a payment plan. It is not a prepayment. Okay. And that would get out of control, especially if it's a 2-year financing for, 14.99% that I'm eating plus 5%. Now I'm eating 20%. That does not work. So credit card, I'm fine with. Again, these are things we've observed that have worked. You have to do what is real to you. Okay. But not patient financing for prepayment. The third thing, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, when you're asking someone to pay today, you need to have the treatment needs to follow up with the same speed and intensity. It can't be, great, let's get you paid up today. All right, we can get you on the schedule in 3 weeks. That is super anticlimactic. I mean, you could apply that to anything, even if you're doing patient financing. If I'm making my financial commitment today and you're asking for me to be fast about it, you need to be fast and get me in on the schedule. So I'm on the schedule within 1 to 3 days, assuming that works for me. Okay. Like you're getting me in quick. Now, if you're in a situation where you're booked out weeks in advance and you can't do this, this is going to torpedo any efforts you're going to make this work. So what I would do in that case is, we did a podcast on this, on how far out the doctor's schedule should be booked. It wasn't that long ago. Go ahead and listen to that. Might be an assistant problem, might be a schedule problem, might be an associate problem, but it's definitely not an ideal state of being. You may think that it is, but it is not an ideal state of being to schedule yourself far out, because there's something that's a bit of a hidden block that you might not be thinking with, which is availability. And let me explain. So let's say you really want to get a lot of new patients. So you go crazy marketing. You're doing PPC, you're doing Facebook ads, you're doing postcards, you're doing an implant funnel. But then I call your practice as a new patient. Let's say I got your offer for a discounted cleaning and exam, or an exam and x-rays or something. And I call your office and I said, hey, I just got your postcard in the mail. I'd like to schedule, I just moved to the area. I'd like to schedule to get my teeth cleaned. And your schedule coordinator rather looks and says, okay, our first opening is 3 weeks from now. Well, in the case of promotion, I don't really have much of a connection to you. I just got a postcard in the mail. I don't know you from anybody, or I saw you on Google, or I typed in dentist near me. I don't have enough of a connection to wait. I may schedule, I may not. I may call another office that can get me in sooner. That lack of availability is going to hinder your ability to get new patients. I'm not saying not to market if you have that problem, but it is definitely going to mess up your marketing. The same thing applies with your production. If you can't get patients in quickly for larger procedures, or really any procedure for that matter, but especially for larger procedures, it is going to kill your sales. Okay. Because especially if you're asking for patients to pay now or commit now, there's all this urgency, and then there's zero urgency on getting me in. That is a problem. That is a real problem. And it will, in a way, start to affect your mindset. After you've had a couple patients sort of, get disappointed that they have to wait so long, or maybe a patient paid and then 2 weeks later, when their appointment was 3 weeks from now, decided to ask for a refund, it will start to play mind games with you and affect your ability to sell. Okay. Just like if, I remember talking to one doctor years and years and years ago, and he was behind on his lab bill from his favorite lab for more, high-end restorative type treatment, veneers and things like this. Well, he actually shied away. So the lab stopped, working with him. He shied away from selling those lab cases that he would have used that lab for. It actually gave him a thought in his mind. It gave him a reservation when he was selling these. So you don't want any reservations when you're selling a larger treatment plan. You want to make sure you can get this person in quickly. So if it's taking a while to get people in, you have a problem. You need to resolve that as soon as possible. We're happy to help. We offer a free practice consultation. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. You can find out more and just click it and check it out. We can help you with these things. But you want to make sure that urgency of the sale is matched by the urgency of getting them on the schedule. Now, let's say you've sold me that $10,000 case and I'm coming in 48 to 72 hours. Okay, you've done a good job here. You can even take this a step further and kind of get me in my mind started on the case. It's not actually starting it. If 48 hours, I could call you, 48 hours from now, I could call you and ask for my money back. But I'm less likely to do that if I feel like I've started. So what you can do is, okay, Jeff, we're going to do some scans for when you come in day after tomorrow and get started. I'm going to be looking at some things to make sure I'm properly prepared. So you're doing a scan. Maybe you're doing an impression of some kind. Maybe you're giving me a couple tips on home care before my appointment. You're just, in my mind, you're getting me started. Have you actually started the case? No, you haven't prepped anything yet, but you're trying to get me in my mind started so that I am less likely to want to unstart. Because remember, again, we're not worried about losing the sale. We're worried about getting the treatment done on me. That is the whole point, right? That's why we're here. So anything we can do to, in my mind, make me feel like I started the case is a good idea. Last thing, as far as making it work, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, is remember, it is a liability. Okay, and that is a bigger deal with the larger treatment plans, right? With the smaller ones, $2,000, $3,000, especially if it's being delivered in 2 or 3 days or within the same month, it's usually not that big of a deal, especially if it's not a very small or high percentage of your production. But it is something that you have to keep an eye on, especially if you end up with undelivered prepaid treatment, because then that is it's a liability sitting on your books, and you want to make sure that you use these things up and get these people treated as quickly as possible. So those are the pros and cons. Those are a couple of the points of advice on using it. All in all, prepayment can be a very useful part of your treatment presentation acceptance process. My advice, look it over if you're not doing it and see how it might work for your practice, or if you are doing it, make sure that you still keep it as part of your, repertoire or your different means of having a patient pay. And obviously, if you have any questions about the legal side of it, check with your attorney. I find it as useful. I find it, people that tend to pay seem to be more committed to what they want to do, and it definitely helps your cancellations and things like this. Anyway, shorter episode this week, but I do hope that it helps. If you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. I put the links to the things that I had mentioned earlier on the episode webpage if you want to check them out. And other than that, folks, have a great week, and we'll see you the next episode.